Hello, creators. Lovely to see you this Monday morning for the Creator Labs. I hope all of you are well. Let me just double check that my audio is going to Twitch. Let's have a look here. To Twitch. Let's have a look here. To Twitch. Let's have beautiful. Excellent. How's everybody doing today? I hope you are all having a lovely January week. It is my birthday this week, so I am set on celebrating it as much as humanly possible. But for those of you who don't know me and are coming across this stream, recording, or live, my name is Emily. I run I suppose, a game tangent company called Story City. We have a platform that allows anyone to make and sell interactive stories that only open in the right location. So think Pokemon Go, but stories, whether they're choose your own adventures, whether it's for film, music, theatre, books, with the idea that this digital content only opens when you're standing in the right location in the city. And so every Monday we brainstorm interactive narratives and choose your own adventures. We welcome anyone to come and have a chat. Doesn't have to be location based. And we just brainstorm ideas and story challenges and go from there. So I think we have the lovely Marguerite on again today. Nice to see you, Marguerite. It's going well. I feel a little bit cold today. It's a little bit gloomy. I don't know if you're up for a bit of brainstorming today, but if you are, let me know. I will use guest star to send on an invite. Otherwise, happy to dive into, I don't know, live editing stories or things like that. I do not mind. This is your hour as creators. So let's see here. Invite Marguerite onto the stage. Very much enjoying guest star. It's a lot of fun. All right. While Marguerite is getting ready, I hope everyone else is enjoying their Monday afternoon. We also started an adventure hour as well here on Thursday and Friday evenings, depending on what day we're able to get our guest stars in. So we've had visual artists on, we've had writers on, we've had musicians on. So have been enjoying that. So let's see if I push this up the stream. Hi Marguerite, how are you? So let's see if I stream. Hi Marguerite, how are you? Oh, sorry Marguerite, I'm getting a bit of feedback there. We can't see your lovely face either. I'm not sure why. But potentially, maybe if you're using a new program, maybe the headphones will help us with the echo. Hopefully we can get a video camera on you soon. I will unmute you for just a minute to see if the audio issue is fixed, and if not, I might wait for your chat in the stream to let me know if you've been able to fix the audio. But we can't hear you if you're speaking, unfortunately. Okay. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can hear you. I still can't see you though, which is sad, but that's fine.
Ah, good. Because I noticed last time we had a conversation.
we're getting that the little bit of feedback, little bit of feedback there. I hopefully um, on my end stopped the double feedback on your side of things. Um, um, and in terms of the raw recording, for all of you who may be watching the video on demand, I think we fixed a recording issue that wasn't letting our guest star's audio go onto the video itself. Um, but hopefully we will get Marguerite back in just a minute. But until then, maybe we can do a little bit of a play around with some um, choose your adventure related goodness in the back end there. So I will wait for see if we can get Marguerite going, but otherwise, I thought that if we didn't get the chance to speak to a guest star this time round, that we would hopefully be able to do some live editing and changing the story. Awesome. So I can definitely see you now, Marguerite.
To do some live editing and changing the story. Awesome. So I can definitely see you now, Marguerite. Hi. Hello.
Hello. I might need you to put some headphones on if you have them. For some reason, this time around, I can hear me speaking as well. So, yeah. I don't know if you have any headphones handy at all. That's a problem. Because we're getting like a very strong echo over here. Um, you can kind of hear the hear us for some reason this week on there. It's causing a bunch of feedback. Um, Apologies about that. I don't know because there's nothing really different from the setup to last week. Whoops. Apologies, Marguerite. The microphone isn't working now either. I I muted the audio for a minute there, and that appears to have stopped the microphone. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go.
I muted for a minute there, and that appears to have stopped the microphone. I'm sorry.
Um, Actually, one way that or what the main problem might be is it sounds like do you just have guest star open or do you also have the Twitch channel open? Because sometimes just turning the Twitch channel, getting rid of the Twitch channel um, page can sometimes help as well. Um, but in the meantime, while we're getting that organized and settled and all of those kind of things, I can always, as I said, share a current project that I'm working on as a creator on Story City. Um, and kind of share um, that creation process, as it were. Um, so this, for any of you who haven't seen it yet, is the back end of Story City. This is how we load in content and locations to help people um, uh, um, go on an adventure in their city. Um, and yeah, Marguerite, we can try again. I'll just waiting here for the backstage to load you in. Um, but until then, the story that I've been recently working on is an invasion in Adelaide. So Adelaide was a city that I lived in for a long time. Got my university degree there, and it has an area in the centre of the city called Victoria Square. And the premise of the story is that aliens have come to invade Earth. They hear that you need balls to be able to do so, and Adelaide has a very shiny set of balls stacked on top of each other in the mall, known as the mall's balls, and so they have come to retrieve those balls. And so the idea behind this very stupid comedy is that they are here to invade, and you are essentially tasked with stopping them. So um, the um, um, reason why I'm editing it, one was to see if much had changed. I'd written it many years ago, and I wanted to double check to make sure all of the things that I referenced were still there. Um, the other thing, because it did reference things like public phones, which according to Google Street View still exist. Um, it's been a very long time since I've seen a payphone, but apparently they are still there. Um, and and so not only kind of confirming that those locations were there, which I did in a previous live stream, but then also to go through and be like, okay, um, I would like to adapt this story so that I could place it in any city, whether it's here in Canada where I'm living now, you know, in the UK or Europe or wherever that might be. Most uh, most of the um, um, most of the cities that I have recalled visiting to or traveling to over the past, couple of years, there is always, without a doubt, some sort of public art sculpture that's like a weird ball sculpture where there are balls as an inherent piece of the artwork. Um, Whether that's in Brisbane, um, where there's these interesting steam balls that look like they've been made out of steamers, um, to um, to a giant pile full of silver balls that is by a river in Edmonton, to the giant bean in Chicago. Um, so every city kind of has its ball sculpture, and so I figured that the joke of aliens needing balls to be able to invade would kind of allow us to um, be able to um, um, bring that gag to other cities, as it were. Um, so, Marguerite, I did send you the invite, and I've sent it to you again. Um, but I have restarted or refreshed guest star, um, and it's just telling me that you're in the queue waiting for you to connect. So maybe if I remove you and then re-invite you, maybe that will work. There we go. So that is the idea or the thought behind um, the adventure that I want to adapt. And so I thought that it would be a fun thing to do live, so that people could kind of, I suppose, see that process of potentially making a choose your own adventure that you could literally do in a city, but making it generic enough that you should be able to uh, making it generic enough that you can put it in another city, but also feel specific enough so that it feels like it was written for that city, which is always the um, trick with interactive storytelling, right? All right, Marguerite, let's give this one more try.
Which is always the trick with interactive storytelling, right? All right, Marguerite, give this one more try.
Okay.
Which is always the trick with interactive storytelling, right? All right, Marguerite, give this one more try.
Okay, I can't hear my voice though.
So if you mute, so it sounds like you have the channel open. If you close,
Yeah, there's a lot of feedback.
yeah. So if you have so it sounds like you've got the channel open. It sounds like you have the Twitch channel open. If you have two tabs open and one of them is this backstage area and one of them is the channel, you need to close the channel to stop the feedback. So there should be the one that you're in right now. So you should kind of have a blue square that is representing me. So you wouldn't be able to see my face. You'd be that blue square. So that's the page you want to keep. And then the other page, which would be the Twitch channel, you close. You want to close that tab. So let's see. If you unmute yourself, let's see if that worked.
Hello.
Hello. There we go. Hooray. I can, yeah.
Okay. Because the reason I had the other, because last week, because I could, we were talking and then I noticed like I went back to check later and I couldn't hear a thing I was saying.
No, so that was not your issue. The way that so the program that I use is called OBS, and for some reason the way that OBS was recording our guests' audio wasn't working properly. Yeah, so we had to myself and my CTO, we were playing around with the stream last week. Anyone who may have come around on Thursday afternoon might have seen us playing around and testing things and trying to figure out why something wasn't recording in the video. So we think that we've got it sorted, because it obviously we can hear each other in the stream, right? It obviously plays fine in the stream, but we're pretty sure we figured out the problem with the video. At least the last couple of videos we've recorded have everybody's audio in it. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because I know I was like, man, that was some really good stuff we talked about, and I wanted to go back and because conversation, yeah. You kind of forget what you've said.
Yeah, same thing. I went to kind of like highlight some parts of it, and you could hear you for the first 6 minutes of that video, and then like halfway through, all of a sudden you couldn't hear you, and I was like, why Twitch, why? So. Yeah, we think we figured it out. If this one does not record properly, I'm going to be a very sad panda.
Yeah.
Particularly because last week what I did was I tried it with the microphone on this headset, but that one made my voice too quiet. So I figured out how to stop the echo for you, make sure that my microphone is loud, and hopefully record the microphone of our guest stars. So the endeavors of learning how to Twitch properly.
Yeah, well, you know how it is with tech of any kind. It's a learning curve and it's a challenge sometimes. Like we think we can take, something as powerful as internet and electricity and funnel it into this tiny little wire that's smaller than your pinky. And that's that whole conversation is another I think we could probably spend a lifetime even talking about that. But yeah, it's such an incredible thing when you think about it.
Yeah, 100%. I feel that. Do you have anything specific that you want to brainstorm today?
Well, I had a really, really great meeting today with a writers group. We're in the process of figuring out our marketing strategy. And I was like, well, we have this system where you can set up. And I was thinking about, because there's a lot of novelists in that space. And it's the conversation around how do you condense, say, 10, 15, 20 pages of a chapter, depending on the length of the book, into one interactive experience that's not too difficult to navigate through. And I know that's a big question, but let's say like this woman, she's writing a romance. It's a historical fiction romance. And it's like, okay, how do you dispense that down into like what's the simplest way of dispensing that down into a storyline that you can use inside of here?
Mm-hmm. I mean, like it depends on. I would take it back a step to a previous question, which is why would you do it, right? Like so what is your
Mhm.
what is the point behind it? Because my um, I know what my opinion is around why writers should not only write novels
Mhm.
but interactive fiction and those
Mhm.
kind of things. And I might leave that until later, but that's more a first question is interactivity um, why do you want it as that writer, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I know I can answer that for myself in the sense that for me, a story isn't just a story. It's a world, it's a mindset, right? And the interactivity is okay, how do you understand that world on a day-to-day basis where you have teachable moments inside of that world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, for because particularly when you're talking with writers who are obviously like used to short stories, they're used to flash fiction, they're used to books, right?
Yeah.
All of them very traditional ways of getting published, but all of them quite onerous in terms of avenues, the number of avenues in which you can get those published. So, the amalgamation of a lot of publishing studios into conglomerates, which reduces the amount of new authors that get picked up,
Mhm.
short story competitions, getting thousands of entries that your story is competing against, like all of those kind of things, right? So there's obviously a lot of waiting to be picked that happens in
Mhm.
publishing in general. Um, and novels themselves, unless you are like my friend Izzy, who can pump out like 4 or 5 novels a year because she is crazy speedy, but also
Mhm.
can tell a good yarn. She, can get quite a lot of content out. But for most people, like for me as a writer, it takes me a year to write a novel. It takes me 6 months to
Yeah.
write the base, and then it takes me probably another 3 months to edit it, um, and then whatever goes from there to put it out into the world, whether that's independent
Mhm.
publishing, pursuing a traditional publisher, etc. Right? So it's a big
Yeah.
time commitment, and so
Oh, yes.
a lot of writers now are turning to shorter novels, like novels that are
Mhm.
120 words,
Yes.
more or ones that are like more novella lengths, like 40,000, because they're finding that they're getting um, dispirited or disheartened when they're at like page
Yeah.
300 and they haven't even like made it halfway through the book yet, and so they want to you know they want to be writing entertaining shorter novels so that
Mhm.
like they feel like they could achieve something. But also if you're writing entertaining shorter novels, it's easier to build up an audience because you're putting out content more often, and so um, there's actually a really great author team called Sterling and Stone and Sterling, um, that actually write their novels in what they term episodes. And so the complete novel is a season, but each
Yeah.
episode is like 120 pages, right?
Yeah.
And there are 7 of those or 6 of those in a season. And so they actually put them out incrementally, and it means that they've built their audience faster. It means that their content comes out more regularly. It feels like they have achieved more. They keep their motivation higher,
Yeah.
and those kind of things, right?
Well,
Um,
it's kind of like that's basically how I set up my I call them installments, um, where it's like 1,000 words a chapter and very sparse descriptions. So then you can fill in whatever, like anybody can come in and fill in whatever kind of settings they want to put in there. I mean, obviously there's visual guidelines, but it's just that, just guidelines, where it's, this really simple approach to writing.
Yeah. And so there is kind of like a movement from a lot of authors to um do shorter works. So,
Mm-hmm.
the time investment that goes into it before you figure out whether you can sell it, whether you can build an audience, that kind of thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and also again keeping motivation high, etc. Is really helpful in a new kind of avenue. Um, but the other thing about interactive fiction, particularly interactive fiction that includes like locations, like what I do at Story City, where your your the reason for you doing that is kind of twofold, because it ends up being shorter than a full novel, so you can be putting out content more regularly, building an audience more regularly. You could be selling something self-contained for like $1, $2 an episode, or whatever that might be, which in the long run might make you more money,
Mm-hmm.
because people want to get it immediately, rather than necessarily waiting for the compilation or the box, the box set, as it were, of the season. Um, so there's those kind of perks to doing something like that. But the other reason why interactive can be a help for someone to adapt a novel into an interactive setting is that it allows people to step into their favorite worlds, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, if they are a historical novel fan and this historic novel is set in Paris during World War II, and it's a romance, and you visit Paris, and so you want to visit the locations that inspired this book and literally step in and pretend you are a resistance underground fighter. Like,
Yes.
that gives people that ability to do that, right? So
Yeah.
you doing that adaptation is going to take you much less time than writing the second novel, which is 90,000 words, right? And so it's
Yeah.
a way to get content out more frequently. It is a way for people to step into your world and into the shoes of your characters. So it gives your audience extra ways to um, interact with your work that is not time reducing all writers are time poor, so it's not reducing too much the amount of hours you have to put into novel writing itself. But also, it protects against stuff as well, like if you have this is kind of more relevant to other industries like performance art and things like that. But if you think during the pandemic, anything that was an event or a physical in-person thing really suffered because people couldn't gather. And in a similar way, different industries have a similar thing, right? Film and television ended up with streaming. Streaming has affected how many people can be employed by the film and TV industries, and then that reduces the number of jobs, and then that means all of a sudden a whole bunch of
Yeah.
people are out of work. And the same thing happens in publishing. The same thing happens in any kind of storytelling industry. And if you don't, and so my ultimate thing is that if you do not diversify,
Yeah.
right? So that would be why I would take the step back and ask that question, because also not everyone's audience is necessarily um, on the technology train either, right? If you
Yeah,
write
that
for
is true.
if you write for young adults, if you are of a millennial demographic, but if you're writing like novels that the average reader age is someone in their 50s to 70s, like introducing something like interactive stories may not make as much sense, right?
Yeah. So then sounds like it's about then, okay, like when I bring someone into my business space, I always run them through an assessment process. to say like, okay, what is it you are doing as a business? What is it you're doing as a creative person? That kind of thing. And what's going to be the most effective way of you communicating that message with your given audience?
Correct.
And that, like you said, that's not always interactive experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, I like it to be because I like the immediacy of that. But yeah, like that's a good question of, okay, is this the best fit for this particular story? Maybe not.
And romance, for example, can make a very good interactive experience, right? But literary fiction may not.
Yeah.
True crime might make a very good interactive storytelling experience, but thrillers that involve, like, you accessing the underground tunnels in a city may not, right? Maybe a little dangerous, right? So
Yeah.
and so it also becomes a thing of like, you may not even convert every chapter in a traditional novel into an interactive experience either, right? Because it may be that if you look at the Da Vinci Code, for example, Dan Brown, wandering around. Oh goodness, is that Angels and Demons or the Da Vinci Code? I can't remember. I think it's Angels and Demons that roams Rome, that goes around Rome. But so you're doing the angel and demons thing, and so like not every chapter can be adapted into the interactive experience, but because they go into underground, Roman systems and all those kind of things. But you could do like little kind of standalone pieces that would then make you helping the character to solve XYZ thing.
Yeah. Well, then it gets me thinking about the intersections between different mediums. You're going to tell the story in a novel much differently than you're going to tell it on a TV screen or in a street theater platform or in a theater setting like I don't know what's an example in Alberta. Well, I don't know, any one of those concert places, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
The satellite.
yeah, and generally the easiest way to adapt something that is long form written content. So if you're talking novels, generally one of the easiest ways to adapt that as a independent creator is via audio, right? And so video can require a skill set that people don't have. Games also requires a particular skill set in terms of narrating. But at its very core, audio tends to be the main thing. And when you're talking kind of interactive related audio, particularly if you're talking location based interactive kind of stories, you've got to kind of consider how long someone will be standing in a place looking around at a location, right? So that's very different to listening to an audiobook. You can listen to an audiobook and a podcast for anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour because you're doing other things and you're moving around or you're driving or you're doing housework or whatever that is. But when you're maybe doing an interactive story where you're moving from location to location in a city, you don't necessarily want to be standing in one place looking around, just listening for 20 minutes, right?
Right.
And so that's another thing as well, is that if you're constantly walking though, where you're kind of moving through a space and along a particular pathway where something's being narrated to you as you're moving through different spaces, then you could do a 20-minute audio, because across 20 minutes you're going from location to location to location to location,
Right.
and then in that thing you're walking anyway, or you're doing something anyway within the story narration. So it's a case of like, okay, is this something more where it matches the activity that you have them doing in the interactive sphere, or is it something where, like, if you're going from location to location and something is meant to be happening in that location, then generally the tolerance for lengths of audios tends to be around the 3 to 4 minute mark, right? And when you're doing those kind of stories, you write much more in terms of like beats than you do in
Mhm.
terms of like long form description, right? Where
Yeah.
you have um, either self-contained kind of vignettes, or you have stuff that is mainly moves towards more radio drama where it's mainly more
Mhm.
dialogue rather than description.
Mhm.
I mean, like you've been to a couple of our adventure hours, so you see that
Mhm.
there's a good mix of description plus dialogue in
Yeah.
those. So like, it does depend on how you want to do that. Um, but generally, that kind of thing works better when you are um, when there is a reason in the narrative for you to be moving from place to place. So if it was a
Yeah.
romance, and so your friend had a
Oh.
romance story, um, and oops, there we go. Hello. Yeah, so if your friend's a romance, and you've got a romance story,
Mhm.
you've got friends talking to bar, you have like, so maybe you have a series of episodes one week where they go from where they work to a bar to out causing trouble in a park, or whatnot. So like you could do kind of like those kind of scenes where you would be moving from place to place, like meeting someone, or maybe there's a big grand romantic gesture where someone's left you notes on a path through the whatever, and that's
Yeah.
the scene that you get. So it's unlikely you would adapt necessarily an entire novel, but you might adapt scenes from that novel, right?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
the way I'm thinking is um, like when I think about, say, have you heard of Beakerhead? I think I might have mentioned it at some point. I'm not sure.
don't know. Doesn't ring any
So
bells.
Beakerhead is they combine art, engineering, and science
Mm-hmm.
into different exhibits and installations. They do a show. I think they do a festival once a year in Calgary. I think it's in October or something.
Mm-hmm.
And with Beakerhead, like when I think of that, like you'll go to one place and they'll have a Gothic spaceship, for instance, in one space. In another place, they have a robotic spider that takes up the entire street. Or there's like all these, and then like one year Chris Hadfield was there doing his, like he was just coming back from the space station, and so they did a he was speaking, that kind of thing. Then I think about, okay, in an environment like that, it'd be interesting if you have your prompt set up, you do your clue, you do your whatever your clue, and then that clue takes you to an event,
Mm-hmm.
or you do a clue and it takes you to a reading, or it takes you to like these different places. And the understanding being, because you explain at the beginning, okay, this is a scavenger hunt on one level, but it's also leading you from one event to the next. And then when you get to that event, you have whatever the length of the event is, and then that after that event is done, you go on to the next, and you can kind of mix up the different expression points.
You could, but you could also do it as kind of like an Easter egg thing as well, right? Like, so
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember, but like, so the Twilight series, Stephanie Meyer took one of the books, can't for the life of me remember which one,
Mhm.
and wrote it from the perspective of a different vampire. Same scene, same battle, but from the perspective of another vampire, right?
Mhm.
And that has and I've seen several authors kind of do that, where they'll take something that was really popular and people are like, I want to know what it was like from the perspective of this person, and they rewrite for the perspective of that person. And
Yeah.
so you could, for example, particularly if you were serializing a story, whether it's on something like Wattpad, whether it's on something like a podcast, whether it is on something like a as we were talking about, shorter novella books that you collect together at the end of like a season, like the Sterling and Stone guys do, where you have something that's in the present day timeline, so a romance or whatever that might be, but a character reacts in a particular way to a certain situation or whatever that might be. You could have a almost like an interactive narrative flashback, right? Where you're like, oh, this is the
Mhm.
reason why this person freaks out over a dog. This is the reason why this person doesn't trust men. And so like you'll get
Right, yeah.
a interactive scene in a bar, right? And
Mhm.
you and so you know, anyone who follows that story could then go out into, you know, their city or whatever that might be, where they could be like, oh, I wonder what was behind the scene or this particular book or those kind of things, and get like more backstory, right? um in that kind of world building metaverse
Yeah,
um thing, right? Where it's essentially a hidden Easter egg for people to discover, um
right.
if they
So,
wish.
so like one of the scenes in my book, it's in the third chapter, is like you were talking about the flashback kind of thing. And the scene is basically my main character is walking down a boardwalk on a lake, and then she hears the sound of a car slamming on its brakes, and that instantly she's back where her dad died and she was driving.
Mm.
And it's like, so what you're talking about is kind of an Easter egg style there, where it's like it's basically sucking you into that experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that way, the narrative, unlike a complete experience where say you would be adapting an entire scene to a walk through a particular neighborhood or whatever that might
Yeah.
be, those scenes do not necessarily have to be sequentially linked because they are flashbacks, right? And
Yeah.
so all you need is that tie to the current version in the book, you know, whether that's a paragraph or whatever, um, and then a complete scene on its own. So that way you can jump to essentially highlight scenes from someone's past where it adds context to a greater novel,
Yeah.
right? But um, you do not have to necessarily. But so essentially, it's kind of like a tour of someone's flashbacks, which then gives extra context
Hmm.
and those kind of things. So it's almost like being able to pick the highlights rather than having to deal with the fact that you've got to get someone from point A to point B and
Yeah.
have a scene that makes sense for people to be moving and all of those kind of things, right? So that means that when you're dealing with something like romance, which is less action packed than a choose your own adventure, if you're dealing with something that um, is a little bit like slower paced, you can still leverage interactivity, particularly in tools.
Yeah. So
To
then from a just like a functional standpoint of integrating into integrating that into the app of like, because like what I'm thinking about is the other, and then the other thing I was thinking about was like Michael walks into a room, that's, you know, the narrator of the story, he walks into a room, he sets a book down on the table and opens it, and then I'm like, okay, there's a table sitting there. So then from a functional standpoint, like I found a really cool kind of AI system where you can create 3D objects.
mm-hmm.
So then what I'm looking at is, okay, I'm creating a 3D table, and then the question is like, and you can, and then I've got another app that you can put the 3D objects into an augmented reality, what do they call it, like it's basically a database system, and then that gives you the ability to access that 3D object and put it into a physical space.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question there is like, okay, from an actual like nuts and bolts functional, okay, putting that table into the story and then saying, hey, you can use that, you can replace it with, you can write your own kind of version and say, I want the table to look like this.
Mm.
And then putting that, I don't know if that's possible, like putting that into the story.
It isn't yet, but I like as a feature. Right?
Yeah.
Where you as a author would have a skeleton of a story, but things like details get to be co-created by someone who's in that city, right?
Yeah.
And so while we were waiting to try and sort out you getting onto guest star here, I was talking to people about how I wanted to adapt a story that I have so that it could be put in any city, right? But then you obviously then run into issues where you can't necessarily put a lot of description in that. But like if you were like, I want a cafe with a table, and hey, here's where people can put that table in the description. And so if you then have the ability for people who are your user to be like, oh, okay, so for me to place a story in my city, I need to find a cafe with a table and a blah, 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 blah. But not only do I get to choose the locations that it goes in, but that I could be like, oh, well, I could put in a description of that table so that it's actually very specific to my city. And you essentially co-create with a community in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I really like that. And I was kind of contemplating the idea actually of like almost having like the ability for people to put in comments where like they're either commenting on what's happening in the story or like almost integrating the ability to fan fiction in a way where people like will dive off on a rabbit hole and actually deviate from the original creator's story to go and do like these like side quests almost, which would be created by like community fans in the same way that fan fiction is, right?
Yeah.
And so I always liked that as an idea to kind of to build that functionality in there, and to have that kind of community creation around around a story. So I like it. Story City currently does not allow you to do that, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I have been on the hunt for, and like I said, I found one where you can. It's called Echo 3D, and then there's like these like I have found a few, like I said, AI driven like rendering. I mean, they have a library of 3D objects, like anything from, what do you call it? Like anything from like a desk right up, and then and trees and lampposts, and like there's like millions of different kind of database systems set up where you can like just generate 3D objects, and then you put that 3D object into Echo 3D, and it's a user based kind of, it's like a tier system where you can pay for a subscription. It's not too bad actually, the price point. Like you can get it for like $100 a month or something like that. And then, you know, when you have a full library of 3D objects, that's a pretty good price. And then like figuring out a way to integrate that into a space. But then when you look at the 3D objects, that customization isn't really there. Like it's just sort of a basic design. But you know, when you're on the go and you're having fun doing an experience like this, you probably don't want anything more than just that really basic setup.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it more versatile in scalability, right? But again, when you're running NVPs like the one that you're running in your small town, like it doesn't, the specificity can be a plus. Right? And you can always remove that later as long as you are intentional about how you insert it into the narrative in the first place.
Yeah. And then the next question about is like we're talking about different marketing, because to me, like when I look at Story City, it can make a really great marketing tool for a business.
Like going back to your example of your friend who writes the historic, or your writers group member who writes the historical romance, the amount of research that they would have had to have done into those historic people, landscapes, etc., would have been massive, and they could use that and do a tour of the literary locations in their story.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a marketing tool that could drive people to the book.
Yeah. And then my thinking also is like using that as like that augmented reality process to say, for example, I know this guy Gordon Mackey here in Okotoks, and he makes these really cool little faces that he actually embedded into trees. It's like a walkthrough where you're your job basically is to find all the faces. And that, to me, that's like, and these little faces are such funny little caricatures. They're just, you can see he's got this really cheeky kind of like, he's obviously a very cheeky kind of intuitive person just looking at his artwork. And then using those faces to like do a roadmap to wherever, like do like scavenger hunt, right? Like, it's
100%.
fun
Exactly.
stuff.
You give them personality, and I remember speaking to a company called Roots Down, who run out of Atlanta, and they help build socially ecologically sustainable landscape, not landscape development, like landscape design, right? And and so they had a project where they put they had these very cute little gnome houses made, which then went into the newly created gardens that they had around several public libraries in Atlanta. And then they had activities around those gnome libraries, and so you could write letters to the gnomes, and the gnomes would write back, and all of these kind of things, right? And so you could like set up little things like that as well, where it even becomes like interactive, where like you have the faces in the trees, but there's a way that you can leave a letter to the spirit of the face in the tree, and then once a week the spirit responds to one of those letters, and you come back the next week and you find out who they've responded to, and like so you can kind of do those kind of things, right? And or like, little fairy gardens where like the community members will add additional things to the little fairy garden, and like the fairy writes them a letter saying thank you for this XYZ thing that you added. My dog loves it, my whatever, like, so like you can kind of do those kind of things. Where you might be a store that sells those knickknacks, or you might be an artist that makes those figures, or like those kind of things. And so, yeah, that it acts as a marketing tool in a way.
Yeah. That's cool. It's like, what was I thinking about? And then with the letters, like, that's kind of an interesting way to, like, when you think about a fairy garden, I mean, that could be anywhere in the world. And say you could even jump in on a mix of, like, say one fairy writes a letter to somebody else in another place. And then, you go through a time portal or something like that. And, that letter could be almost like a key to get to another place. Or you could be part of a conversation where one fairy is writing a letter to another fairy in another garden, and one is in, the States, wherever that place is, and then the other one's over in England somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. You almost got like a little portal. You have a little portal to another place, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That magic allows you to explore.
And that's where I love that whole concept of portals, right? Like, of being able to be in really almost two places at once, or more even, like, if you're looking at it from a meta-narrative standpoint.
Yeah. And so you have the ability to do those kind of, marketing related things. You have the ability, like, as you said, like, of doing kind of like, the story that you're proposing is almost like a serialized story, right? Where each week a new kind of chapter would come out. They would visit the same or similar locations, and so you, in the same way that you have like a serialized, podcast where the narration moves forward every week and you learn a little bit more, you can build those kind of experiences in that interactive realm as well. So, yeah. All right. Well, we've come to the end of our Creator Lab hour. Yeah. It was delight as always to ruminate with you, Marguerite, on all things interactive story. And it's always something different every week. I know that people who watched the stream previously could not tell that from our recordings the last 2 weeks because they couldn't hear you, but hopefully we've got that sorted. They hear the full conversation this time around. Creator Hour is meant to be to brainstorm any sort of, interactive story is our love, but, just stories in general. And, whether that's, in the publishing realm, the gaming realm, the film realm, it doesn't matter. We're just, kind of trying to build a helpful community here of narrative designers and writers and creators, and building unique stories that invite an audience in, right? And for those of you who are interested, as I said, I run Story City. We are a platform that is freely available to creators to create stories that only open in the right location. So it's free to become a creator. If you just go to about.storycity.app, you'll be able to find the links there to set up an account and have a play with it. And then come and join us here and brainstorm ideas and fun ways that you can make new things for your audiences. So thanks, Marguerite, for joining me again this week.
You're more than welcome.
I appreciate that. I look forward to seeing you again next week. It's becoming a habit.
Yes. Well, I'm setting it up so that I do this every week. Like for me, it's a great space. I like talking to you, and you always have such integrative kind of ideas. I love that kind of thing. So
happy to help. And everyone else, obviously, who's either watching the stream or watching the recording, you're more than welcome to join us. Guest Star allows us to invite a bunch of people onto the stage. So come join us, say hi, brainstorm. Until then, we will see you next week. For those of you who are interested in our Adventure Hour streams every week, we have another one happening this Friday with Sanderson Gonzaya. He was the illustrator for a wonderful treasure hunt story, which we will be live reading on Friday. And of course, we will be bringing a host of other random creators